The living room was filled with the usual Sunday chatter, the air alive with the comfort of family familiarity. Jake sat on the couch, his son tugging at his arm, eager to show off the latest Lego masterpiece. Emma, his wife of 12 years, was laughing at something his brother Ryan had said across the room. It was a good laugh, too good. Jake's brow furrowed as he glanced between them. There was a shared energy between Emma and Ryan that felt off. Ryan, his younger brother by 5 years, had always been the charming one, the life of the party, the one with stories that drew people in. Jake had always admired that about him, even when it came with a certain arrogance. But this was different. Ryan's smile lingered a beat too long as Emma responded, her cheeks flushed. Jake dismissed it as coincidence. Maybe they'd shared an inside joke. After all, Emma was the warmest person he knew, someone who thrived on connection. But then Ryan reached for the coffee pot and their hands brushed. Emma pulled hers back quickly, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. Ryan's gaze followed her for a second too long. Exhaling, Ryan's gaze followed her for a second too long. Jake's stomach tightened. It was during these gatherings that Jake usually felt most at peace, surrounded by the family he cherished. But now, his sanctuary felt contaminated. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that afternoon, while everyone was outside enjoying the barbecue, Jake lingered in the kitchen rinsing dishes. Ryan walked in, his steps light as always, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Need help?" Ryan asked, reaching for a towel. Jake shook his head. "I've got it." Ryan shrugged and leaned against the counter, sipping a beer. His casualness was as natural as ever, but Jake couldn't help noticing how Ryan glanced toward the patio door. Toward Emma, who was chatting with their mother. The next day, Jake began paying closer attention. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, didn't want to let paranoia tarnish the love and trust he'd built with Emma. But the evidence began to pile up in the quiet moments. The way Emma's phone was always angled away when she texted, the muted notifications, her sudden need for space during their weekly family dinners, an extra trip to the store, an urgent work call. One evening after Emma had gone to bed, Jake sat in the dim glow of their living room, scrolling through his phone. He didn't think of himself as the kind of man to snoop, but the nagging unease was impossible to ignore. Her phone lay on the coffee table, her lock screen displaying an innocuous weather notification. Jake picked it up. He didn't want to look, didn't want to be that husband. But the phone buzzed in his hand as a message popped up from Ryan. "Tomorrow at the usual spot. Can't stop thinking about today. Less than 3. Jake's heart sank. The room felt colder, the shadows heavier. He stared at the message, the implications tearing through him like a storm. Tomorrow at the usual spot? A place they shared that he wasn't a part of? For a moment he considered waking Emma, confronting her then and there. But no. He needed to be sure. He needed proof. Irrefutable proof that his world was being dismantled by the people he trusted most. Tomorrow, he decided, the truth would begin to unravel. Jake couldn't sleep. The faint glow of the alarm clock illuminated his side of the bed as he stared at the ceiling. Next to him, Emma slept soundly, her breathing steady. He envied her peace. Or, more precisely, the facade of peace she carried. His mind raced with questions, none of which he was ready to answer. The following morning, Jake's routine was slower than usual. He feigned sleep as Emma got ready for work, listening as she moved quietly around the room. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Jake resisted the urge to reach for it, knowing his suspicions alone weren't enough to justify the invasion of her privacy. But the question remained. What would she do when she thought he wasn't looking? By the time Emma left for work, Jake was already dressed and determined. Instead of heading to his job at the construction site, he called in sick and waited. His plan was simple: follow her. Emma's car pulled out of the driveway just after 8 a.m., but she didn't take her usual route to the office. Jake followed at a safe distance, careful not to draw attention. The suburban scenery blurred past him as they headed toward the outskirts of town, where boutique shops and quiet cafes lined cobblestone streets. When Emma parked near a small cafe with outdoor seating, Jake's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He watched as she got out, her movements fluid, deliberate. She wasn't meeting a client or running an errand. No briefcase, no files, just her. A few minutes later, Ryan's car pulled up. Jake's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel as he watched his brother step out, his ever-present air of confidence on full display. Ryan greeted Emma with a smile Jake knew too well. It was the same smile Ryan had flashed at countless women during their teenage years. Back when they shared everything, even secrets, they sat at a table tucked away near the back of the patio, their voices inaudible from Jake's car, but their body language spoke volumes. The closeness, the easy familiarity, the way Ryan leaned in when Emma spoke, it all confirmed what Jake feared most. But he needed more than stolen glances and assumptions. He needed undeniable proof. Later that night, while Emma showered, Jake made his move. He unlocked her phone using the passcode he'd memorized long ago, feeling a pang of guilt as the home screen appeared. He didn't have to dig deep. A separate folder in her photo gallery labeled Work contained images that had nothing to do with presentations or office parties. Jake's hands trembled as he scrolled through pictures of Emma and Ryan, selfies in a car, blurry shots from a bar, and, worst of all, a picture of the two in bed, his brother's arm draped casually over her bare shoulder. Jake put the phone down, his chest heaving. There it was, irrefutable proof of their betrayal. His world shattered in that moment, the foundation of his life crumbling beneath him. But amid the wreckage, a flicker of determination ignited. They thought they had fooled him, thought their secret would stay hidden. Tomorrow, Jake would begin to piece his life back together and destroy the lies they had built theirs upon. Jake spent the night pacing the living room, his mind racing through possibilities. Anger burned hot in his chest, but he fought to temper it with focus. This wasn't just about confronting Emma and Ryan. It was about ensuring they felt the full weight of their betrayal. He wasn't going to be the man who exploded in a moment of rage, only to have his pain dismissed as overreaction. No, he needed to act deliberately. The idea of exposing them at a family gathering struck him like a lightning bolt. The next family dinner was only days away, a routine gathering at their parents' house that everyone attended. It would be the perfect setting, a public forum where neither Emma nor Ryan could deflect or minimize the truth. The humiliation would be inescapable. Jake spent the next morning organizing his evidence. He'd printed out screenshots of Emma and Ryan's texts and the incriminating photos he'd found on her phone. The images were damning, but the messages, filled with flirtation, stolen plans, and confessions of love, were the real dagger. To ensure there would be no escape, Jake included a timeline of Emma's work trips and late nights that coincided suspiciously with Ryan's availability. His methodical nature, honed over years of managing construction projects, became his greatest weapon. Still, he hesitated. What would this revelation do to his parents, to the family as a whole? He pictured his mother's face, her warm smile that would inevitably collapse into shock and disbelief. She adored Emma, had always said Jake was lucky to have married such a wonderful woman. And Ryan, the golden boy who could do no wrong in her eyes. What would this do to her vision of the perfect son? But the thought of staying silent, of letting them continue their deceit under the guise of family loyalty, was unbearable. Jake wasn't the one tearing the family apart. Ryan and Emma had done that the moment they decided their desires mattered more than their bonds. Jake's resolve hardened. That evening, he sent out a group text reminding everyone of the family dinner, masking his true intentions behind a facade of normalcy. Ryan responded with his usual enthusiasm, oblivious to the trap being set. Emma, sitting across from Jake on the couch, responded in kind, her face neutral, as if nothing had changed. The following day, Jake prepared his evidence further. He stored the messages and photos on a USB drive which he tucked into his pocket, and printed copies of the most damning pieces. He rehearsed what he would say, carefully crafting his words to deliver maximum impact without unnecessary cruelty. This wasn't about vengeance, he reminded himself. It was about truth. As the day of the dinner arrived, Jake was a storm of emotions. Nerves, anger, anticipation, but he remained outwardly calm. He arrived early, offering to help his mother in the kitchen, his every movement steady and deliberate. He glanced around the house, imagining how the night would unfold. By the time the truth came out, there would be no going back. Jake took a deep breath and waited, ready for the storm to begin. The family dinner began as it always did, with warm hugs, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of familiar conversation. Jake sat at the far end of the long dining table, watching the room like an outsider observing a performance. His father laughed at one of Ryan's jokes, the kind of easy laughter that came with years of shared memories. His mother moved between the kitchen and dining room, fussing over the food, her face lit with the joy of having her family under one roof. Emma sat beside Ryan, casually engaged in conversation. Her smile seemed natural, effortless, as if there wasn't a crack in the facade of their lives. Jake clenched his fists under the table, his mind replaying the images and messages he'd uncovered. As the meal progressed, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of what he was about to do settled heavily on his shoulders. He looked around the table, at the faces of his family, each one oblivious to the storm about to hit. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this the right way to handle it? Could he endure the fallout? But then Ryan leaned toward Emma, whispering something that made her laugh quietly, her hand brushing his arm. The sight reignited the fire in Jake's chest, burning away any hesitation. No, they needed to face the consequences of what they had done. Jake tapped his glass lightly with his fork, the soft clinking drawing everyone's attention. "Hey, everyone," he said, standing up. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "Before we finish dinner, there's something I need to say. Something important." His mother, mid-bite, paused and looked at him curiously. "Jake, is everything okay?" Jake smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a good question, Mom. Let me answer it this way. Funny how family loyalty doesn't mean the same thing to everyone." The room fell silent, the warm atmosphere replaced by a growing tension. Ryan shifted in his seat, glancing at Jake with a flicker of unease. Emma's smile froze, her eyes darting between Jake and the rest of the family. "What are you talking about?" Ryan asked, his tone forced and casual. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, his voice sharp, "is what I'm talking about. It's proof. Proof that two people at this table, two people I trusted, decided that their selfishness was more important than our family." His mother gasped softly. "Jake, what are you saying?" Jake took a deep breath, then turned his gaze directly to Emma and Ryan. "I'm saying that Emma, my wife, and Ryan, my brother, have been having an affair behind my back." The room erupted. Ryan stammered, trying to deny it, but Jake cut him off. "Don't even try to lie. I have the texts, the photos, every single message." Emma's face drained of color as she tried to speak. "Jake, Oh," Jake interrupted, his voice firm. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify. The proof is here. I trusted you, both of you, and this is how you repaid me." The table sat in stunned silence as Jake placed the USB drive in the center. "You all deserve to know who they really are. Look for yourselves." As his mother's tears began to fall and his father's face twisted in anger, Jake sat down, his hands shaking. He had exposed the truth, and there was no turning back. The silence after Jake's revelation was deafening, the kind that stretches time and suffocates the air. His mother's trembling hand reached for the USB drive, her face pale and stricken. His father sat frozen, his jaw clenched, unable to speak. Across the table, Ryan and Emma were a study in contrasts. Ryan, pale and rigid, trying to feign indignation, while Emma's face crumbled into shock and horror. "Jake!" Emma began, her voice small, pleading. But Jake's raised hand cut her off. "No," he said firmly. "You've had plenty of chances to tell the truth. Now it's my turn." Jake's father finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Ryan, tell me this isn't true." Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out. The look on his face was all the confirmation anyone needed. "Oh my God," their mother whispered, burying her face in her hands. The weight of the betrayal rippled through the room, tearing apart the once familiar bonds. Jake sat back down, watching as the full impact of his revelation settled over the table. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and vindication, but no joy. This wasn't a victory. It was devastation. Ryan finally found his voice, though it came out shaky. I didn't mean for it to happen." He glanced at Emma, who was staring down at her lap, tears streaming down her face. "It just—" Jake let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "That's the best you've got? It just happened? You're supposed to be my brother, Ryan, my blood. You didn't just happen to meet her in secret, to text her late at night, to lie to me at every turn." Emma raised her head, her voice breaking. "Jake, please, let me explain. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But it doesn't change how much I love you." "Love me?" Jake's voice cracked with incredulity. "You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face? How long, Emma? How long have you been loving my brother behind my back?" She hesitated, her silence answering for her. 8 months, Jake said bitterly. "I already know." The room dissolved into chaos. His mother sobbed openly, her world shattered. His father rose to his feet, his fists clenched as he glared at Ryan. "Get out!" he growled. Get out of my house! Dad, wait, Ryan pleaded, but his father wouldn't hear it. You betrayed your own brother, his father thundered. You've disgraced this family. I don't want to hear another word from you. Ryan rose slowly, his face a mix of defiance and shame. He looked at Jake, who met his gaze with cold detachment. You did this to yourself, Jake said quietly. As Ryan walked out, Emma turned to Jake, her eyes wide with desperation. Please, Jake, she begged. I'll do anything to fix this. I was stupid. I was weak. I can't lose you. Jake looked at her, his heart heavy. There was a time when he would have done anything to protect her, to shield her from pain. But that time was gone. You already lost me, Emma, he said. The moment you chose him, you ended us. He rose from the table, his hands shaking as he gathered his coat. His mother reached out for him, her tear-streaked face filled with anguish. Jake, please don't leave, she whispered. I need some air, he said softly. I can't be here right now. Jake stepped out into the cool night, the sound of his family's grief muffled behind the closed door. He leaned against the railing of the porch, staring out into the darkness. The weight of the evening pressed down on him, but for the first time in months, he felt something close to relief. The next few weeks were a blur of difficult decisions. Jake filed for divorce, determined to reclaim his life and dignity. His parents, devastated by Ryan's betrayal, struggled to navigate the new reality of their fractured family. Emma sent messages, long emotional texts, tearful voicemails, begging for another chance. But Jake didn't respond. He knew that opening that door would only lead to more pain. As for Ryan, he moved out of state, unable to face the family he'd betrayed. The once tight bond between the brothers was gone, replaced by a cold silence that neither time nor apologies could repair. In the months that followed, Jake focused on rebuilding his life. He found solace in his work, his friends, and the quiet strength that came from surviving betrayal. Though the scars remained, they were a reminder of his resilience, a testament to the man who refused to let betrayal define him. The family dinners were quieter now, but they were honest. And for Jake, that was enough.